Nicolle, which makes baby and toddler products, of which I buy many these days, says of tariffs, quote, "It just hurts the consumer straight up, 10 times out of 10. Exporting countries do not pay the tariffs. It's that simple." All the while, Elon Musk, the man who Trump wants to lead a, quote, government efficiency commission, who also has multiple companies with massive contracts and deals with the U.S. government, just recently said that in order to cut back on government spending, there will be some temporary hardships. This is what Donald Trump is selling to the American people. Stuff gets more expensive, and publicly stated hardships are warned. Meanwhile, an economic report released earlier today shows GDP rose at a 2.8% rate in the most recent quarter. New York Times puts it like this, quote, "Consumers are spending, inflation is cooling, and the U.S. economy looks as strong as ever." It's where we start today with two of our experts and friends, people who know more in their little pinky fingers than I ever will about the economy. Co-anchor of Squawk Box, CNBC's signature morning program, and New York Times columnist Andrew Ross Sorkin. Thank you for being here. Also joining us, my wing woman, anchor of the 11th hour here on MSNBC, NBC News senior business analyst Steph Roll. So I know the political landscape and how things get distorted, and I know some of the calcification. I was a Republican. I used to campaign on a message for economy. But the data is now so enduringly obvious that it is not true. So what is this about?
Well, I think what it's been about is about politics for the last several years. And if a group of people are told and frankly misinformed over and over and over again that the economy is terrible, they think to themselves that the economy is terrible. But the truth in black and white, I like to think that we live in a very world of gray. This is black and white. Historically, under any empirical measure you can find, this economy is flying. It's hot. You have wages up this morning at 4.6% year over year. I mean, there's no number in these reports, whether it's about economic growth, whether it's about jobs, whether it's about wage growth. You know, they say, well, what will the economy be like if the next 4 years were anything like this last 4 years? Well, what would it be like? It would be actually quite extraordinary. I mean, just think about the trend line of what's happening here. If it were to actually continue this way, it would, I mean, I think people would think we're living in Alice in Wonderland.
Andrew's absolutely right. But the reason we're sort of susceptible to this idea with people feeling like it's bad is because life is expensive. And while wages have gone up, right? When I get a raise, I think that's because I'm great. But when everything costs when everything costs more money, I blame the government. So people don't connect the two. So even though they have more money in their pocket, they have more purchasing power, when things cost more, they're angry. And that anger, those are the things you talk about day in and day out. You talk about it when you go to a restaurant and it costs more and your drinks cost more and the groceries. So that feeds into it. And we know it's expensive to buy a house. It's expensive to rent an apartment. But for Kamala Harris, what she has been doing now, and it's been important to articulate, inflation is a problem. But what Donald Trump is offering the American people is only going to worsen inflation, worsen the deficit. And when you're the president, you don't have a magic wand to fix things. You mentioned it just a moment ago. We have a housing shortage, and no president can wave a magic wand and solve that. She's trying to address it. But A, we have a housing shortage, and B, at a federal level, it's very difficult to put affordable housing around this country, because go to cities and towns, and what are you going to hear at every township meeting? That people don't want affordable houses built in their town. So it's a complicated problem that the current administration gets tagged with. But what they're finally leaning into now is it's not just the data. We're doing well as a country. We just are.
And I guess what I want to understand is Trump used to do his things that would hurt him politically in private, and we would learn about them through investigative journalism or through business leaders that he was on the phone with. Now he says them from podiums. This tariff thing would hurt everyone.
It would, but for Trump, and this is what I think is getting missed, is his perfect way to pick winners and losers. It's why you're seeing more and more business leaders either saddle up to him or just go quiet, because it's not like he's going to instill tariffs across the board, but he remembers, and he was humiliated in Lordstown when he said, don't sell your house, nobody's shutting down a plant. He learned last time around he doesn't get to control what Ford does and GM does, but what he does get to control is you get a tariff. you get a waiver.
Right.
This guy gets, so Andrew and I could be in the same business, but if Andrew's his homeboy, he could give Andrew a waiver, and that gives Andrew a monopoly.
Well, now
so
we're
Trump
talking
has realized the huge power it gives him.
It's a power grab. And by the way, that's why you're hearing these stories about some of the major Fortune 500 CEOs who are now not just going silent, but in some ways, making private phone calls to him, cozying up to him either in public or private, because they know that if he does win, they need to be able to make that phone call, and they're going to need his help. By the way, Apple makes most of its products in China. Tim Cook needs Donald Trump to be nice to him. Why do you think you haven't heard much from Apple?
Wait. This is now not a conversation about the economy. This is a conversation about the richest and most powerful people in the world leaning into autocracy. Why is that where they are?
They wouldn't think of it that way.
Well, it is. I mean, have them call all the companies in Hungary whose daughters tweeted ugly pictures of old Victor. I mean, a capricious autocrat doesn't give a hoot if you called and said nice things or didn't go to a Kamala Harris rally.
If we have an autocracy, then democracy won't work. The economy won't work. But in their minds, they're thinking they're beholden to their customers, their employees, and their shareholders. And they're rationalizing it. And I'm not defending it, but they're rationalizing it by saying, I have to just do my job. And for my company, I need to make sure I'm on the right side of whomever the next president is. And the truth is, if they end up on the wrong side of Kamala Harris, she's still going to do the right thing. She's still going to treat every business the same way. And they know they're dealing with something truly different in Trump. And I'm not excusing it, but that's their mindset.
If the wealthiest people in America can't stand up to something that they think is a threat, and some of them actually do.
Who?
You can
name one. Who?
Reid Hoffman, former CEO of LinkedIn, right? And that's
he's out. And he's out there. But what I was going to say is
Mark Cuban, maybe who I think is the best.
Why is Jamie Dimon telling people in the New York Times that he's voting for Kamala Harris,
and won't say it out loud?
Yeah, why?
Right? I was going to say Jamie Dimon used to donate to political figures under his own name, right? Now he doesn't. His wife does. He doesn't do it. Why? Because
the men are literally hiding behind the women. I mean, this is everything happening in this moment.
Warren Buffett used to literally throw rallies for Hillary Clinton. Was very public about how he felt because he was a CEO that he didn't give away his right to vote or to support candidates. This year, he said, I'm not going to get involved in it. The country has become too tribal.
And it's also bull because in Jeff Bezos' case, right, where he wrote the op-ed on Monday, and he said, listen, there's been such a loss of trust in this country. It doesn't matter who you do it. There's no loss of trust on both sides. The reason there's a loss of trust in media is because for the last 30 years, far right-wing media, right, Roger Ailes is laughing up at us from hell. They created this loss in trust, right? Day in and day out, as Donald Trump is telling you, I'm going to sue Pennsylvania and this election is rigged. It's those lies that have been told over and over, day in and day out for the last 30 years that's caused this distrust. And for Jeff Bezos to kind of hide behind that, well, there's no trust out there. If Jeff Bezos was going to make the decision, because he's now given a free pass to all sorts of other business leaders to now hide, for Jeff Bezos to say on the eve of the election, we're not endorsing, that doesn't fly. It would have worked if he said it in January, potentially.
And he's lost 250,000 subscriptions from the Washington Post.
Which doesn't hurt him, it hurts his journalists.
Nothing hurts them. I mean, they're sailing away on their yachts with their abnormal muscles at their age.
But more than that, nothing hurts them because if he's nice to Trump, what maybe he'll get is a big fat contract for Blue Origin, his space exploration company, which doesn't make money and needs government contracts.
But why don't they feel any connection to living in a Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman have nothing compared to Jamie Dimon and Jeff Bezos, except principles.
So there's a fascinating article in Fortune that's an interview with Jeff Bezos' former PR guy, who basically tries to explain and rationalize why Jeff might have made that decision, and says that he would probably go through sort of a decision tree of sorts, where he says Blue Origin and the future of humanity is at stake. Maybe not democracy, but humanity. I forgot
how small their egos are. This is helpful. Keep going.
No, but this was the explanation. And therefore, if you were making that decision tree and you cared deeply about Blue Origin moving forward because you thought it really was going to help humanity, and that Trump could potentially stand in the way of that if, in fact, he became the president, that you would make that decision.
And let
me stay on humanity. Does he not realize that a pregnant woman in Georgia, 2 of them die? I don't buy humanity. I mean, tell them to take their humanity and shove it up, you know what? Because humanity is caring about your fellow Americans, not being in such a bubble that you you think your, space capsule is going to save the world.
Look, I'm not going to defend the decision. I think what happens with a lot of people, though, who make decisions like this is they genuinely do think that they are making a principled decision. We, of course,
what principle?
We can disagree with them.
They think it's for, and I'm not agreeing with them, they think it's for the greater, bigger good. And where you bring up Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, here's the difference. Neither Jamie Dimon nor Jeff Bezos have ever woken up and been discriminated against for their sex, their age, their race, for anything. Right? They have never been at risk. So if you're someone who's truly never been at risk, you have a different perspective. And this argument that, like, Blue Origin is the wave of the future, we might not have a present. So that's what's absurd about that argument.
I don't accept that, because if you're a white woman, you certainly understand the pain of being a mother to a black son and being terrified every time they get in the car to go wherever they're going. I don't accept that just because they're rich white men, they don't understand the pain of others. What is it that keeps them from saying autocracies all over the world are bad for capitalism?
I think that they look at which way, I hate to say it, I think they look at which way the wind is blowing, and they say they're going to get blown over. I do think that. By the way,
but here's what's complete bull.
If you read the op-ed, one of the things he says, which I don't think is untrue, and I think he believes, is very much that the op-ed unto itself was not going to change the voters' view of the world. And so I think in that context, he says to himself, well, we can do that. We can either step out and say this, and it's not going to make any kind of difference, though obviously makes a huge difference, by the way, to the people reading it, and now we're having this conversation. But I'm not here to defend the position.
I'm desperate to understand it. I worked for Republicans. I've never demonized corporate America in my entire political life. But I'm disgusted as an American that people with everything will do nothing for people with nothing. People who don't have the money to hire fancy lawyers but are going to go out and work the polls next Tuesday. Who's protecting them? They don't have drivers and security. And that they have more courage than 98% of the business leaders in America galls me. Explain it to me.
Well, here's what's especially stupid. The fact that they're now going with the wind of, oh, things look good for Trump. This whole things look good for Trump is smoke and mirrors. Donald Trump, we don't know how this election is a dead heat. We don't know where it's going. But what I do know is Donald Trump is the king of projection. He has perfected smoke and mirrors. And he has Elon Musk more than in his pocket. And Elon Musk's misinformation machine, which is Twitter, has a huge impact on the psyche. And the fact that tons of people who Andrew and I cover are now talking day in and day out about poly market and the betting markets and how things look so good for Trump. Let me tell you, the only thing easier than manipulating a boy is manipulating a stock. And that is absolutely what is happening in the betting markets. It's absolutely what's happening with DJT stock. So the fact that real investors are saying to the two of us, holy cow, you're looking at the markets? Baloney. Poly market, the biggest investor is Peter Thiel, who built J.D. Vance in a lab and presented him to us.
But I think part of it is I think they look at this as asymmetric risk. That's the explanation. And by the way, it probably starts with someone like Governor DeSantis. I think that the corporate America saw what Governor DeSantis was able to do in terms of true demonstrable retribution to the Disney Corporation in the state of Florida as it relates to taxes. I don't think we'd ever seen anything like that before, and said, you know what? A politician with power can actually do demonstrable damage potentially to our business. And I think they're looking at that and saying to themselves, we don't want that. And they're too scared to stand up, because if they were to stand up and be on the losing end of it, which, given how close things are, again, this is not my rationale. I'm just trying to rationalize why this may be happening. You have people who I would love to see stand up, and I've had private conversations with them about that. But it's not something that you're seeing publicly.
I understand all of that. And as the only person who's ever worked, on a Republican campaign,